Hi, my name is Tom Rawls and I'm the pastor here at Proclaimers, and I'd like to welcome you to our YouTube channel. Sunday by Sunday we take great delight in sharing what the Bible has to say. The Bible, probably one of the most relevant books in the entire world, with principles that touch every area of our lives. One of the key ingredients to the life of our church and its preaching is the variety of those who actually get up and speak. From myself with over 40 years of experience, Dr. Phil Temple, who is a psychiatrist, doctor, medical doctor, again with 15 years of experience at preaching. We've just had such a phenomenal blessing by having so many great speakers. We hope you enjoy this particular YouTube video of our latest ministry here at Proclaimers. So thank you again for joining us and God bless you.
You know, we were in this boarding school. It was in the town of Uti, and very often we would sort of escape from the boarding school and go into the town. And there was this one restaurant that we always used to go to. It's called Hotel Blue Hills, and it served the best fried chili chicken that you have ever had. Tender, juicy chunks of chicken, marinated in this spicy mix of flavors, deep fried to the perfect degree, and it was served so hot that you couldn't even pick it up at first. Oh my word, it was a delicious chili chicken. It was unrivaled. I mean, it was probably the best around. But there was a problem with this chili chicken, because every single time that anyone went to Hotel Blue Hills and had the chili chicken, they would get diarrhea afterwards. Yep, the dreaded deli belly would hit you within the next few hours. You were merciless to the ooty booty that would ensue. But despite these severe, very severe ramifications, it was always worth it for this amazing chili chicken. And the whole hotel was always packed out. And you know, there was this time when it came to the end of the semester and everyone was getting ready to leave and go on holiday. Some people were driving, some people were catching trains, some people were flying. And one of my friends at the time, he lived in Thailand. And his trip to get back home was quite a long one. It required a 2-hour drive to the nearest train station. Then an overnight train to a city, which then they would fly from and have another 3-hour flight to get to Bangkok. It was a long journey. And it was not the most comfortable conditions, you could say. I mean, the drive to the airport, it was a long way. And there were no shops, restaurants, or proper places that you could stop. Which meant that if you needed the loo, it was a case of finding the nearest big bush that you could squat behind. The train was better. It had a toilet. Well, I say toilet. You see, if you're on a train in India, a toilet's more of a hole in the floor that people had to squat over. The plane was even better than that. I mean, it was similar to any toilet that you would have on a plane here, but the difference is, flying out of India, I can guarantee that there would be many other people who would be suffering from Delhi belly, which quickly turned those toilets into like a war zone. Now, my friend, he knew all about this. He knew the journey that lay before him, and he knew how bad this hotel could mess him up. But as we were sitting at Hotel Blue Hills, just before everyone was getting ready to leave, some of our friends who weren't going too far, they were having this chili chicken, and my friend, he just couldn't help himself. Aware of the fact that he had hours to travel, he went for the chili chicken. And I want to sort of tell you more, but the details are too gruesome, so I'm going to leave that to your imagination of what would have happened. But this is just an example. It's an example of how sometimes things can be okay for other people, but not for us. There were a number of other people that were eating chili chicken on that day, but eating chili chicken would have had far worse consequences for my friend than anyone else. Everyone else who was about to do a long journey knew that it was not a wise move to have chili chicken, but there were other people who were enjoying it. And the point that I want to get across has nothing to do with chili chicken or horrible travel in India, but it's the fact that just because other people do things or say things or live in a certain way doesn't mean that we can live that same way. I mean, it might sound a bit unfair, but so often in our life, we're sort of faced with two different standards. What we see everyone else do, but what we know isn't quite right for us. Sometimes there's these two standards, what works for other people and what works for us. Do you know anyone who, for example, manages to stay skinny regardless of what they eat or not going to the gym? John knows someone. Have you ever had a friend that spends, an hour in the library at that assessment and yet still gets a better grade on that project after you've spent way longer on it? Have you ever spent ages slogging away at trying to get a new friend group, trying to make friends, and then someone just turns up and straight away it almost seems like they effortlessly just connect with everyone? Very often there's two standards in life. And very often we can look over to the people who seem to have it easier and we sort of wish that we could have it that way. But then there's also things that we would say aren't right for us personally. Things that go against our principles. Things that maybe are against our convictions or against what we believe that we should do. We're all faced with things that we see happen, yet we know aren't quite right for us. Even though we know deep down in our hearts it isn't right, it can sometimes make us wonder why it's okay for other people. I mean, it could be something like having people around you who, they do things that you disagree with. Maybe they drink too much or they smoke too much, or you watch those friends on Instagram who seem to be having really wild parties all the time, and yet that lifestyle might not be what's good for you. How about when there's other people that you see who seem to be living these glamorous lifestyles, buying all the new gadgets, spending money everywhere, but you know that if you were to live like that, it would not be sustainable on your finances. Maybe it's when you get into a relationship and you decide to finally commit to someone, but then you have that fight. And you know of so many examples of people who have broken off that relationship, yet you know that you need to stay committed even though you're hurting. Maybe it's when you witness someone else at work cutting corners, when you can see that they're able to get away without doing the job properly, and it makes you wonder if you could do the same. Sometimes it's even here in church. Maybe on a Sunday, there's people who, they have a lie-in in the morning. They don't go to church, and you see them when you're getting ready, and it makes you wonder why it's okay for them to skip church, but not for you. Or you see a friend buy a new phone, eat at a new fancy restaurant all the time, or go on fancy holidays, and you think to yourself, if I didn't tithe, maybe I could do that. If I didn't have to give 10% of my income, maybe I would be able to live like that. If I didn't support that compassion child or support that charity, then maybe I would have the money to be like that. Sometimes it just feels like life's unfair. Like there's two standards. That you have to be a better person, that you have to do more and give more and sacrifice more than other people. And I don't think that we're the only ones to feel like this. Because Jesus talked about a similar thing. While he was surrounded by a great crowd of people, Jesus had some controversial words to say. He said to the crowd that were listening, "But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you." Doesn't that sound a bit unjust? When you first hear it, when you stop and think about it, does that sound unjust? Loving those that hate you, to want the best for those that are obviously against you. When Jesus was talking about turning the other cheek after someone slapped you, the Jews around him would have understood that it was also referring to when someone insults you. In an honor culture like that of the Jews that we're hearing, this would have been incredibly hard to fathom. I mean, even today it's hard. When someone insults you, you want to fight back, right? But Jesus is here telling us to take it again, to be willing to take it again without responding, still showing them love. It's a huge ask. In the Old Testament, a person's coat was often used as collateral to ensure that their debt was paid or they did what they promised. A coat was seen as almost like someone's right. And to take away someone's coat was a miscarriage of justice. But on top of that, to then offer your shirt as well, this is asking a lot from the people that were listening. To give freely and widely and not expect it to be returned to you, it just sounds unnatural, right? Illogical even. It sounds borderline ridiculous. This would have been what the crowd were thinking when Jesus talked. But then Jesus said, "Do to others as you would have them do to you." And this got me thinking. Maybe Jesus was not just giving us a list of what we can do or what we should sacrifice for the sake of other people. Maybe Jesus was not instructing us to be passive, to be weak, to roll over when we're faced with adversity, to back down when other people are aggressive. Because very often people have this perception of Christians that they are meant to be weak. That what Jesus was saying, that we are meant to just sort of hide away when things come up against us. But this line, do to others as you would have them do to you, it's an indication that Jesus wasn't telling people to allow other people to walk over them. He wasn't saying that we should just allow people to walk over us, but rather he wanted us to pick ourselves back up again and show other people that there was a better way to live. A life that Jesus time and time showed us again, a life that benefits society, benefits culture, and even benefits us as individuals. Jesus was modeling this societal change that would create a system that offered a better way of living. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Spurgeon described it as this: "Oh, that all men acted on it. There would be no slavery, no war, no swearing, no striking, no lying, no robbing, but all would be justice and love. What a kingdom is this which has such a law." When you love those that hate you, when you wish the best to those that mistreat you, you disarm the situation. You provide the opportunity for conflict to be resolved and reconciliation to follow. This makes relationships better. It makes your relationships with everyone better. When someone insults you or is unfair to you or unjust to you, our first response is always to fight back. It's easy to have that knee-jerk reaction, right? To aggressively respond. But wouldn't a better reaction to be actually to stay calm? To think before we react? To be willing to endure just another insult rather than escalate the situation? In his letter to the church in Rome, Paul would put it another way: do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. When someone takes something that you have worked so hard for, when someone asks you for something that actually requires a sacrifice from you, it can be much easier for us then to say, okay, that's enough. I'm not going to let anything else go. To become tight-fisted instead of being generous. To allow our heart to become bitter at the cost to us. But the Bible always shows us that giving is actually a movement of the heart. And so if it ends up turning us negative, then that kind of defeats the major part of the purpose, right? See, Jesus sets out this high standard. He tells us how we should be interacting with others, how we should act in love, in patience, and in generosity. And to be honest, that's really hard. It's a simple instruction, but actually living that out is an incredible challenge. How many of us actually feel like loving when we're not loved back? How are we able to be patient when everything is going against us? Are you able to be generous when it feels like there's going to be too much of a cost? And Jesus, it sounds like he understood that the crowd would have been thinking about this as well. Because he goes on to challenge them and he says, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Jesus he's making a point that anyone can love and be good to the people that they love. But what he wants from us is something far more. He wants us to be willing to do this to the people that we would classify as our acquaintances. You know, the neighbor that we only talk about the weather with. The people that we just pass by on the street. But also to the people who, get on our nerves. The ones who always make a point to disagree with you. Even the ones that actually hate you. Jesus then continued the story and he said, then your reward will be great and you will be children of the Most High because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. If we are willing to live life to this higher standard, then our reward will be great. But what does this actually look like? Does it mean that you will have an easy life? That you won't have problems? That there won't be any issues that come up? I don't think so. Does it mean that you will have abundance in wealth maybe, in success, in prosperity? It might do. I'm sure that's what the people listening were hoping for. But I think what Jesus is trying to say is that we have been set apart. That we have been called and identified as the children of the Most High. That despite our inadequacies, our failings, our inabilities, we have been chosen as children of God. And as children of God, we have an authority to live out our lives in His name, to see His will unfold on this earth. This verse isn't saying that we have to live this life in order to be called God's children, because the reality is there is nothing that we can do to change that. We became God's children through what Jesus did, through His death and resurrection, not by any achievements or actions on our own, not that we deserved it, not that we can obtain it, not that through our faith, but only through our faith in Him and acceptance of what He has done for us. It's only by His grace. So is this the reward then? That suddenly our lives are no longer meaningless, but suddenly they're full of worth. That we are no longer insignificant, but more valuable than we can ever comprehend. That we no longer have to just try and get by, but that our God actually has a purpose for us. That by accepting this higher standard that He is calling us to, we're choosing to be carriers of what God wants for us. To be people to influence society. People that change this culture. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Jesus is asking us to be like God, to be merciful like God is, to love like God does, to sacrifice like He has, to follow His example and how He interacts with people. Through all of His teaching, Jesus is showing us the lifestyle that He wants us to lead as His followers. It's a lifestyle that, to be honest, we shouldn't expect to see in other people. It's a lifestyle that would set us apart from people in this world. It's a calling to a higher standard. And regardless of whether you have a relationship with God or you call yourself a Christian or not, I believe that Jesus' words, they speak to us as humans. It speaks to a desire within us to be significant and have a purpose, to make sure that our life actually has meaning. Jesus' words are incredibly powerful because what He was saying was not to tell us to just, bow down to anyone who comes up to us, to back away from any conflict, but rather it's a way to transform our community, to see more good in our world. It offers us a way to be part of changing the society for the better. And it's something that we can all get on board with. That's something that is actually worth ingraining in our lives. We're called to this higher standard. But man, it can be hard to live it out. And if we are going to live this out, we need to ensure that one of the first things we do is we live our lives with humility. If we see ourselves as too important, then it becomes a barrier to us living this higher standard. Without humility, it's hard to sacrifice. When we think of ourselves as too great, it becomes hard to go that extra mile. It becomes hard to endure things, to endure insults and personal injustices from those who, are out to get us. It holds us back from being able to give when we deem those people to be underneath us. To live out this higher standard, we need to have humility. And humility, it begins with submission. Submission to God. By choosing to put God's way over our own. By first seeking His desires over our own desires. That we allow God to live in us and through us. To live our lives in surrender to God, because it is through our surrender that He is able to do more in us. That as we decrease, He increases. Through submission to others as well. As we look to put others before ourselves. And an easy way to start with this is actually just to, do something that you would not otherwise be required to do for someone else. To choose to serve someone else. We all have opportunities in our everyday life to do something for someone else. But when we choose to give up our time, when we make an intentional choice to put in our energy or whatever it might be, when we choose to put other people and their needs before our own, we step onto that path of humility. But despite this higher standard that Jesus calls us to, if we don't hit that mark, if we don't always get it right, then the amazing thing is that doesn't exclude us from a relationship with God. King David that ruled in Israel, oh my word, he had a whole list of failings and flaws. I mean, David was a murderer, he was an adulterer, he was a mercenary, he was a coward, he had broken relationships with all of his family. He had so many problems and issues, yet despite these failings, David was still described as a man after God's own heart. And the same is true for us. Despite what we have done or what our story may be, we are sanctified through Jesus rather than through our actions and the sweat of our brow. When we do miss the mark, it is imperative that we always keep coming back to Jesus. This isn't an excuse. Don't get me wrong. This is not an excuse to not live a life that is aligned with Jesus' teachings. We do still need to strive to be everything that he has called us to be. However, if, or more likely when you mess up, it is imperative that we come back to him. Every day we have moments, we have times where we do miss that mark. And so I think what we need to do is we need to build into our life those regular opportunities to come back to Jesus on a daily level. Spending time praying and reading his word and building a relationship, but also on a weekly basis too. Don't miss church. You can have a great personal relationship with God, but there's things in church that you can't find a substitute for. Church is essential to find those people that are going to build you up. It's only in church where you can be convicted by those things that you may otherwise be unwilling to address if you're by yourself. It's in church where you get this opportunity to engage in corporate worship, an experience that is so hard to be able to get by yourself. We can't do anything to make God love us any less. We can't do anything to make us any more worthy of a relationship with God. It's only through Jesus that we find our salvation, regardless of all of our actions. I love what Phil was saying as he led us so powerfully in communion, because so often it's true. We complicate it, but it's simple. We just need to keep on coming back to Jesus. However, when we do miss that mark, we run the risk of allowing the shame and the guilt that then comes afterwards to drive a wedge between us and God. And so it is essential that we regularly come back to him on a weekly and on a daily basis. The band's going to be heading up soon, but there's one more point that I think is important for us to think about. Jesus has called us to live by a higher standard, to live a more holy life, yet simple obedience can be very hard in today's society. Obedience can sometimes be something that we struggle with when, to be honest, self-control is thrown out the window. In a society that's always pushing people to fulfill their own wants and to pursue fame and the Instagram life. And so often, we know what we should do, but whether we actually do it is another thing, right? Jesus told us to love those we hate, to give without asking for anything in return, to treat others as we would want to be treated ourselves. And this is more than a suggestion. They're instructions, but are we actually willing to live this through? To take this on board and actually go do it? Are we willing to turn our good intentions into actions? I think one of the biggest struggles when it comes to this is, when it comes to being obedient, we're always willing to procrastinate, right? To put it off. If we see something that we know we should do or someone that we know we should be helping, sometimes we're willing to, wait until later to act on it. But maybe we need to make an intentional choice to do it immediately. Because by putting it off, we risk forgetting about it or maybe not even being able to follow through and do it later. So act immediately. Follow what Jesus says straight away. If you hear or you read something that Jesus says and you can apply it to your life, then do it immediately. And it's the same thing when we're trying to do things for other people. When we're showing love to other people, we need to implement this principle in our life immediately. Act on it straight away. Because the best way to be and to stay obedient to God is to act on those opportunities immediately, as soon as he tells us to do something. Because this is what God called us to do. It's the lifestyle he called us to lead. To live our life to a higher standard. A standard that sets us apart and identifies us as children of God. Because imagine what would happen if we actually decided to live this out. If we were able to love everyone, the ones we like, but even the ones we don't like. Imagine if we were also willing to respond to these people that hate us with love. Imagine if we were able to stay calm when people were attacking us that we were able to endure offense rather than immediately retaliating and escalating the problem. Imagine if we as a community, if our generosity had no boundaries, that we were willing to give freely. Imagine the community that would create. Imagine if we were actually able to live out the lifestyle that Jesus talked about, the example that we see in God. I believe that it would be big for our society. It'd be big for our workplaces, for our friends. It would cause our relationships to be healthier, our families to be stronger. I believe it would create a society that God wanted for us. It would give us the opportunity to actually do something and bring more good into this world. It would be the opportunity for us to stand out so that people would see a lifestyle that is so different from everything else they see in this world and say, hey, what is it? What is it about them? There's something about them. Where they go, they bring love into situations that are otherwise dark. Where they go, they bring hope when there is none. Where they go, they just seem to have something different about them. They're generous, they're patient, that they're not the cause of problems, but they bring the answer. Maybe then we would start being able to take everything that God tells us and take it to our world. To be able to take what we learn and spread it to people. Maybe we'd finally be able to have those answers for a society that has so many problems and doesn't know where to look. Maybe we'd finally be able to stand out as those chosen children of the Most High God, because people would see the example that we have in our life and know that it comes from somewhere else. That's what we're called to do. What Jesus was talking about wasn't just telling us to, roll over when things are hard. It wasn't telling us that we are meant to be weak. Instead, it's telling us that we're here to change things, that we're here to make a difference, that we are here to change society. Jesus has a higher standard that we do have to live up to. It's a higher standard because He wants big things for you and from you. He's got a purpose for you. He wants you to be influential. So He calls us to a higher standard. It's a higher standard that's hard to live, but we need to get out there and live it. We are called to this higher standard. Thank you.
And if you did, why don't you subscribe to our channel? Better still, send us some feedback. If you have questions, let us know. We'd be more than happy to interact and engage with you. Thank you again, and we hope that you will join us soon. Why not try and make it to one of our services one Sunday? We're meeting here in Norwich from 10:30 a.m. and then again at 5 p.m. at night. We'd love to see you. God bless you.